Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and this time I'm going to be giving you a full tank review on the Tier 10 Soviet heavy tank, the IS-4. Stick around, I've got some ace tanker gameplay coming right up after I give you a full rundown of the statistics and compare it to some of its Tier 10 heavy tank peers. And as always, if you have no interest in playing the IS-4, I'll show you how to take them out effectively on the battlefield. So here we have the IS-4 on the left, the IS-7, its direct Tier 10 Soviet heavy tank counterpart and also rival, the Chinese 113, and two German Tier 10 heavy tanks, very well armored, E-100 and the Mouse, a lot like the IS-4. Immediately we notice that the DPM of the IS-4 isn't all that bad. It's slightly higher than the IS-7 and significantly higher than the Mouse and comparable to the E-100. And it's only really vehicles like the recently buffed 113 that stand above it and quite significantly with regards to DPM. You will have got used to the IS-4's 122mm main armament when you were playing the ST1, and everything is just a little improved, including the rate of fire, I believe the accuracy, and also the aim time now down to 2.9 seconds. One of the advantages to the IS-4 compared to all of these other tanks is that its penetration on its armor-piercing rounds is just a little bit higher. 258 is better than the IS-7, 9mm better than the 113, and wow, significantly better than the poor penetration of the E-100. However, one thing that's certainly not great on the IS-4 is the amount of ammunition it can carry, only 30 rounds, and remember that the alpha damage is 440 on this 122mm, which is 50 less than the IS-7. Towards the end of the game, you can certainly feel pressed if you have missed a few rounds or having to dip into your reserve heat rounds. So what about the weapon handling on the IS-4? Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag here really. While it does have slightly better aim time than the IS-7 at 2.9 seconds, look at its dispersion values when it's moving. It has the worst dispersion values when moving out of this comparison, but at least when you're only turning the turret, it's not all that bad at 0.08. And while the vehicle has one extra degree of gun depression like the IS-7 over the 113, it doesn't compare to the E-100 or the Mouse or vehicles such as the T10 and the 6 degrees of gun depression pretty much all around this tank, apart from directly over the back on each corner, does feel somewhat limiting. Speed-wise, the IS-4 does very well for such a heavily armored tank, 43 kilometers an hour, which sure isn't going to be as fast as the IS-7 or the 113, but it does leave the Germans lagging behind. And it's the same story for the power-to-weight ratio. 12.39 is worse than the IS-7 and significantly worse than the 113, but again, better than the Germans. Its ground resistances, however, certainly could be better, and it's only the IS-7 that has worse ground resistances in this comparison. And this story once again repeats itself when we look at the turret traverse of this tank, 22 degrees, slightly worse than the IS-7 and the 113, but better than the Tier 10 Germans, and again with the tank traverse, 26 degrees, slightly worse than the IS-7 and the 113, but better than the Germans. So far we've found out that the IS-4 doesn't have the best gun or mobility, but certainly doesn't have the worst. What about its armor? Well, this is where the IS-4 excels. 140mm at the front, 160 at the side of the hull, and 100 at the rear. That gives this vehicle the second best side armor, lagging only just behind the Mouse, and this vehicle has got more at the side than a tank such as the 113 has even at the front. The turret also is rather decent, 250 at the front, 200 at the side, 170 at the rear. And when we take a look at the model, we can see that there are track segments over the lower plate of the IS-4 as well, a lot like on the upper hull of the IS-3, and this increases the armor to 180mm from 160 on the lower plate. And actually the thinnest armor on the tank is on the upper hull at 140, and this driver's hatch that isn't very well angled is indeed 210mm thick. The IS-4 certainly does have raw thickness with regards to one of its strengths. And the whole of the side armor is 160mm thick, with the tracks providing an extra 20mm of spaced protection. When we angle the IS-4 at pretty much 45 degrees, take a look at how impressive the armor is. The whole of the upper plate here is 280 or better, and those two tracks on the lower plate are still 270 up to 280, and you'll have to hit the thin bar outside of that to be able to penetrate the lower plate around about this corner, where it'll be still 240mm thick. At this kind of an angle, the whole of the side armor of the tank is 280 up to 300. At the back of the tank, 400mm. The IS-4 certainly is one of the most impressive tanks when you just angle it at pretty much 40 to 45 degrees. So what this means with the IS-4, that there are many tier 8 and tier 9 and even some tier 10 tanks that if you're angled like this are just not going to be able to penetrate you unless they fire premium rounds. And there's also more good news for the turret. We can see over the mantlet here it's 400, some areas down to 300 around here on the cheeks, which is the weak point of the front of the turret. and it's up to 400, 600 ricochets in this kind of an area. And the only part of the IS-4, a lot like the IS-3, that is actually weak is this top area here directly above the gun on the roof of the tank, which is 30mm thick. But in the next patch, when the overmatch mechanics are reworked, and check out my video on it if you don't know what I'm talking about, this whole weak point of the IS-4 will pretty much disappear. And one thing that's interesting about this tank is you can do the same to the top of the hull. If for some reason you're above the IS-4, you can shoot down onto the hull and overmatch it in exactly the same way. One thing the IS-4 is amazing at as well is reverse side scraping. Let's imagine that there's a wall and the IS-4 has just reversed up alongside it. It can still shoot you with its gun. Where are you going to hit this tank? Well, the whole of the side armor now is pretty much about 330mm of effective armor. And so unless you've got ultra high penetration, you are not going through the IS-4, and it's one of the most effective ways to be using this tank, and you'll probably be best to just fire high explosive rounds at this tank if you see it doing it to you. And so we found out that the tank has a lot of armor, and one of the best things as well is the IS-4 has a lot of hit points to go with it. 2,500 hit points to be exact, 200 more than the 113, 350 more than the IS-7, and it's only really the tier 10 Germans, the E100 and the Maus, that outperform it with regards to durability. And this has to be the key strength about the IS-4. It's not as slow as the Germans. I would argue it has a slightly better performing gun, and yet it still gets to about 80 or 90% of their durability. So how do I recommend to equip the IS-4? Well, first and foremost, you always take a large caliber tank gun rammer, because who doesn't want 10% increased rate of fire? Next up, if a vehicle can use it, and the IS-4 can, take vertical stabilizers Mark II always, because they reduce your dispersion by 20% when moving and also when turning the turret, and they just help your aim time so much. Personally, for me, in the third slot, I prefer to use improved ventilation to make your tank overall 2.6% better by increasing your crew skills by 5%. However, if you want to increase your view range and be able to spot your opponents at further distances, then I do recommend taking coated optics, but with its 2.9 seconds aim time and okay dispersion values, I can't really justify using a gun laying drive on this vehicle to improve the aim time anymore. Crew skills wise, it's very generic. You want to take repairs first on a fresh crew, then you want to get Sixth Sense on your commander, then when you have your third skill, take Brothers in Arms and rinse and repeat. Skills that I think will be exceptionally useful on your other crew members will be Snapshot on your gunner, on your driver. You probably want to be taking clutch braking to improve your fairly poor tank traverse speed, and also things like off-road driving I think could be very useful for your driver. And on your loader, I recommend taking Safe Stowage. Unlike me, I should definitely reset that, but I think I'm going to wait till it's on discount. One of the annoying things about the IS-4 is it only uses 4 crew members, and that puts an amazing amount of pressure on your commander. Personally, for me, I would love to have situational awareness and also recon on this tank, but you can't really afford to sacrifice repairs, Sixth Sense, or Brothers in Arms. Nevertheless, I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's get stuck into some gameplay. So here we go, we are assaulting on Sand River. You know what, certainly not one of my favorite maps for the IS-4. It feels like it's long range and needs at least a degree of gun depression. I'm going to make my way over into this kind of D0, E0 area. That's because there is no artillery on the enemy team. I would never go over into the location which you see me trundling over towards, because if there was artillery on the enemy team and I made my way over here, they're just going to take dumps on me again and again and again, which I really don't like the sound of. If there was artillery in this matchup, I would probably make my way over towards this corner, although this corner is rather annoying because it's very passive, and then people towards the center of the map that you can see here will nail you before you're able to progress around the corner and get up here, but sometimes you just have to take the risk. Alternatively, I guess you could try and work your way actually down the river of Sand River and try and eventually end up in this kind of a position, but it just feels a little bit too dangerous. I think we have to make use of the fact that there's no artillery on the enemy team and try and push our way along the east. So, check out the mobility of the IS-4. Not too bad here, even along, I guess sand counts as soft terrain in World of Tanks. I'm not 100% sure there, really. But we're up to about 40, 43. It certainly feels nice to play this tank and have the durability of the IS-4, as I mentioned when I was reviewing the statistics compared to the tier 10 Germans. Now we're going to advance. I'm thinking about making my way down here to go after the 113, but then I think, oh gosh, I'm only going to get myself isolated. Instead, I wanted to make my way up here, not allow them to hopefully be above me. In this position that you're going to see me in, apart from these couple of shots that go into my tank here, yeah, that's a bit awkward. I lose, what, 1,000 hit points right at the start because I made a bit of a misplay. I was indecisive. I wanted to go down there. I should have just gone straight along here. But don't worry, they can have those 1,000 hit points. I've got another 1,500 to spare in this game. And obviously the rounds that went into our tank there, well, that's interesting. Look, one overmatched that 30mm as I was talking about, and the other one probably just took my tracks off because I wasn't angling my tank at all. But now I am in the position that the IS-4 is king, and that is just side-scraping like a total boss. Let me just show you what the enemies will be seeing in this position here. Come on, wish I could go a little bit faster around the map. So from this position, let's take a look to see what this IS-7 and the 113 are shooting at. Well, not too much. When I side scrape out along here, they are looking at a fearsome vehicle, but I'm popping up on the ridgeline here to engage the E-75. What? Why am I not obliging and showing you guys what the IS-4 looks like when it's side scraping? Well, I'll show you in just a second anyway. This E-75, I don't know what he's doing. He allowed us to get a really nice, easy shot into his lower plate, but that is a Jagdpanzer E-100. That is a big gun. Tier 10 tank destroyers are usually counters for Tier 10 heavy tanks, and you shouldn't really mess around with them. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is in this position, they pretty much can see that. They've got my side armor, which is 160mm thick, remember. They might have my upper hull, but my upper hull is angled. And what you want to do is just side scrape slowly around the corner and put pressure on them. Alternatively here, I could be reverse side scraping the tank, but I want to try and keep my frontal hull armor towards my opponents, because if they're above you like this, then as we're going to see in a second, they can shoot down on your hull, which is a rather awkward thing. But we finally connect a shell into the IS-7 there, locking him down. Centurion Action 10 ricochets off us, and the 113 manages to penetrate us. And do you want to know how he managed to penetrate us there? It was that shell. He was above us and he fired down onto our engine deck. I'm pretty sure next patch, in 9.17, that would have probably been a ricochet because they're removing or at least modifying the 3x caliber rule. So this is really just the IS-4 in a nutshell. It just gets itself into a position and makes itself a royal pain in the backside to be able to dig out. And you know what? The tank's gun handling isn't that bad. Its accuracy isn't terrible. Its aim time, as long as you're not making dramatic movements, isn't too bad either. And you can just keep plugging away and picking apart your opponents. That 113 even getting so bored that he's firing a high explosive round at my tank. And my tank just absorbs the shell, eats up that high explosive round, and there you go, a Borsig sneaks a shot down onto the 113 all the way from on top of the hill. So that's a great result for me as well. Effectively, I'm baiting them so far up on the corner that it allowed my sneaky tank destroyers to get some good shots into them. So, effective use of this position in the IS-4. Now, of course, if there were artillery on the enemy team, it would probably be a completely different story. I think I'd still probably be on 2,600 damage. I might have a little bit more spotting. I might be trying to spot this Jagdpanzer and the E-75 a little bit more if there were artillery as well. But I think the enemy artillery would have probably punished me quite convincingly in that location. So far we've seen that the only time the IS-4 has been penned is when they've overmatched the top of the tank, or alternatively when I just drove out completely side onto them, and I think it was the T10E5 put a round into my vehicle. So apart from that, pretty much everything has been ricocheting off this tank, and that's what you can do if you can get yourself onto a corner and side scrape. Now I'm going to be firing some heat rounds now. I'm starting to run low on my armor piercing ammunition. As I mentioned, only 30 rounds of ammunition on this tank is rather poor, but a nice shot right up into there. This is one of the advantages of having a turret right, guys. You can just slowly work the ridge line and find the weak points of the tank destroyer. He had to turn his side to all the tank destroyers that I have behind me, and he gets taken out. So I don't want to waste the heat round, but you know what? I wish I hadn't reloaded now. I wish I had the heat round loaded to be able to fire at the C-75. But all's well that ends well, as we fire, I believe, an AP round there, right through the side of his tank, tracking him and putting our total damage up against the E-75 now to 1,332. There we go, 1,740. That Tier 9 German heavy tank will rue the day that he fought against the IS-4. Can we put a round right through his turret? Yes, we can. A heat round there with, I think, 340, or is it 330? 340 millimeters of penetration going right through the E-75's front of his turret. And hello, Centurion Action 10. Mistakes were made there. And this really, guys, is just the IS-4. This is it. It doesn't really get much more complicated in this tank. Wow, I cannot honestly believe that he managed to ammo rack me somehow and also take my tracks off. I don't even understand that. I honestly have no idea how that guy managed to ammo rack me and take my tracks off in that position. In a T-44-100? Whoa, that was weird. Anyway, let's get on with it. Maybe I'll try and have a look at that in retrospect later on. But how does that... Even if that gentleman's firing APCR rounds, he's only got 230 millimeters of penetration, and I was sure that my side armor would be able to hold up. One of the best things about the IS-4 as well is when you just get to grind into lower tiered opponents. Let's be honest, when you're playing your heavy tanks are best when enemies' penetration are lower, and generally lower tier tanks have got less penetration. We get our revenge there on the T-44-100, he's not going to be ammo racking me again. And the T-34 bounces his first shell. 246 millimeters of penetration, I think, there on that tier 8 American premium heavy tank. Unable to go through my side armor, we put one into his hull. He does manage to penetrate my side armor there, however. I think it's because I'm tilting my tank upwards, maybe over-angling just a little bit there. And so he manages to take my tracks off again, which is a little bit concerning, but not really too bad, because his rate of fire is what, 4 rounds a minute? My rate of fire is 5 rounds a minute, and that means 1 dead tier 8 American heavy tank. Pushing our total damage now up to over 6,004 kills. Great result so far, only 2 minutes left on the game. But unfortunately, the IS-4 is now just a little bit too slow to be able to get anything more out of this game. Look how, fair enough, we can go at about 35, 40 kilometers an hour, but that just isn't fast enough to be able to pick up the scraps, and we secure a great victory assaulting on San River in a fairly tight game statistically. So here we go, we're playing on Ensk, and this is every heavy tank's environment, right? That urban combat. The IS-4 is certainly no exception. Whenever I get a Runeberg, an Ensk, a Himmelsdorf, I certainly feel very happy when I'm in the IS-4. Beautiful side scraper. I should also mention that this was the last game that I played on Sunday during my IS-4 Tech Tree Showcase. Massive thank you to everyone who tuned in for that. I think 8,000 concurrent viewers. The amount of positive feedback that I've been getting from my Tech Tree Showcases is absolutely fantastic. And you know, there's probably about 40 or 50 Tech Tree Showcases still to do in the game, I should imagine. So, I look forward to making that certainly a weekly thing now. Now, we see that the Batchat is in a platoon. This is the dangerous platoon on the enemy team, those tier 10 medium tanks. I was really thinking that they were going to push down the east and win the game very quickly. But we see that actually there's a Batchat who's made his way into the middle of the map. I'm just trying to look for a shot into him. I always think that that position that the Batchat has gone into is very aggressive, and I always regret going there. I'm certainly trying to teach myself in my medium tanks to not use it, but because it's just not really worth it. Fair enough, you can get some vision down the train tracks. If you've got artillery, I guess it can be useful, but the amount of focus and the risk that you can have for going there is certainly rather dangerous. So having put a round into him for 457 damage, now I turn my attention to pushing forwards. I don't think they're going to be pushing down the middle of the map, so at least that avenue to the base is secured. So I'm going to go and try and work this location. So we're not driving around anywhere really quickly, and so that means that, holy moly, did that Batchat 25 TAP just shoot his friend in the back? Possibly, okay. The T-54 is already firing heat rounds at me. We're certainly going to have to watch out for this player later on. I mean, there's nothing wrong with firing heat rounds at an IS-4. In fact, it's completely the correct ammunition to use. And if I was firing at an IS-4 and I didn't fire heat rounds, I would pretty much be throwing my money away in the T-54, because you are going to bounce every single one of those 200mm penetration shells against this tank. The Batchat 25T AP actually manages to take my tracks off there. I use my repair kit where my ammo rack goes down to start to move around, and this T-54, I think he might have bitten off a little bit more than he can chew, and we put one round into him for 478 damage. So right now, I wanted to isolate the Batchat 25T, because as soon as you've got the autoloader out the way, you should be alright. But there's a TVP T50/51 who's going to be shooting me in the side, and I put a round into him, and I wonder what's going on. Oh, Mr. Jaegeru, please don't push me out in front of 2 autoloaders. But luckily, it looks like the TVP isn't fully engaging us, and the T-57 Heavy is being taken out, or at least on very low hit points. Ah, well, fair enough. Eventually, your chancy shots have to have a downside, right? And we managed to miss the T-54 completely there. I'm side-scraping, and he realizes he doesn't want to fire the heat rounds into the side of my tank where my tracks are likely to absorb it. And the Jagdpanzer E100 just decides to push me out the way a little bit, but that's okay. I mean, me and this Jaeger were pushing through this situation together, and I would have probably died without him, and likewise. So there's some kind of synergy going on there, even though I feel like he might be blocking me a little bit. But when you're a gigantic, fat E100 Jagdpanzer, it is quite hard to be able to avoid that sometimes. So we get our revenge on the T-54 for all of those heat rounds, finishing him off, and you can see how this tank can simply out-trade, right? The T-54 will do 320 alpha damage every time he hits me, and he's lucky if he penetrates me, really. Whereas I'm doing 440 to him, and my 258 millimeters of penetration, more than enough to go through that tank pretty much everywhere, apart from the more angled parts of the turret. But the enemy have taken the base. We're going to have to push back as quickly as we can to be able to defend it. I don't want to stop for too long. In fact, I don't stop at all. Shooting the RU-251 Speerpanzer on the move there at 35 kilometers an hour. Pushing forwards, there's only 10 seconds left on the cap. It looks like my light tanks are doing some good work with the interrupts. Trying to figure out who's going to have the defensive points here. Probably not the Batchat. 4 seconds, 3 seconds. Back to 7 seconds. 6, 5, 4. Yeah, we shut down the 907 underneath the train tracks, completely resetting the gap, and the enemies now realize that they have to push out to stand a chance to win this game. A beautiful moment for us. We managed to save the base, and from here on the autoloaders just don't have the continuous output to be able to save themselves. I come around the corner, shut down one of the Batchats. Not sure if that was the one that I shot earlier. No, it was a completely new Batchat. And I load a high explosive round to be able to go after the RU-251. One into the back of him, securing our 5th kill, 5,000 damage in less than 5 minutes. Beautiful game for the IS-4 here. And we get hit by an artillery for the first time during this tank review from over in the eastern corner. And I guess I should just address that. I mean, come on, do you really need to show me... Oh, sorry. Do I really need to show me getting hit by artillery in the IS-4 again and again and again and again? That's what happens to heavy tanks, right? I wanted to try and get some more of the... Oh, wow, I don't manage to penetrate the Batchat 155-55 with my high explosive round. What is the penetration on this? 68! I thought I would be able to go through him there. I load an AP round. Surely this is going to be the kill. It whiffs completely over his tank. Come on, where's the Top Gun? Give me the Top Gun. Want to take out this artillery at the end of the game. Surely this is the kill. Yeah, there we go. Taking out the Tier 9 French self-propelled gun. So just a very quick mention, when the IS-4 faces artillery, it certainly is an ugly affair. As I mentioned, the whole of the top of this part of the tank is 30 millimeters, and this area up here as well is also 30 millimeters. So if a high explosive shell hits anywhere on here, or God forbid, an artillery firing an AP round, you are going to lose your hit points very quickly in the IS-4. And so what you always want to do is establish how many artillery there are on the enemy team at the beginning and try and figure out positions that you can use to hopefully still be effective while avoiding them. As soon as you get into close quarters combat with artillery, however, it's not such a big deal as long as they're not hitting on top of your tank with large, well, should we say long arcing shells like this. It's not too bad. And as soon as you've got them in close quarters combat and they're hitting your thick parts of your frontal armor, they're not really too much of a concern. Nevertheless, great round here on Ensk, showcasing exactly what the IS-4 is good for. That is, just keep plowing on forwards, angling your armor to dissuade your enemies from shooting you or completely negating their damage in the first place and securing the game. Let's just take a quick look at the post-game stats for both of these replays. So our first round on Sand River was a steel wall and a high caliber medal. 3,270 damage blocked with our armor of the 16 hits that we received, and we also managed to do a little bit of detecting damage as we put ourselves at the front of the lines. We fired a few heat rounds here, but we still managed to make 30,000 credits profit on Ensk. High caliber, this time a Top Gun. We didn't get shot enough to really demonstrate the armor potential of the vehicle. But this one hopefully demonstrated a little bit more of the pushing capabilities of the IS-4, and this time I don't think we fired any heat rounds, so we make 47,000 credits profit. So what we find is that while the IS-4 is not the most heavily armored tank like an E-100 or a Maus, it also isn't as slow as them, and it doesn't have gun capabilities that are as poor as the Germans. But if you want to have more mobility and gun capabilities, then you're probably wanting to go more for something like a 113 or a T10E5. Now there's no doubt that the IS-4 is capable of some incredible things, as I've showcased in both of these replays. It is a very resilient tank with a good performing gun, and if you combine that with some good awareness and focus and always try and keep the most effective part of your armor towards them, you're always going to do well in the IS-4. But I also think that it hasn't really stood the test of time very well compared to a lot of the other heavies. The glory days of the IS-4 were back when premium rounds were not available for credits, there weren't tier 10 tank destroyers in the game, and so many high tier medium tanks barely had over 220 to 30 millimeters of penetration. Now most tier 9 and tier 10 medium tanks have IS-4 got about 270 millimeters of penetration. And so effectively, what we have found is that there are far fewer tanks on the enemy team where the IS-4 just feels like it completely negates them. And in a world of escalating gun capabilities with regards to penetration and alpha damage, it's up to you whether you think the IS-4 is the right tank for you. So hopefully this tank review was useful to you, or maybe you just enjoyed it. If you did, please consider giving the video a like, it really helps the channel out. And let me know in the comments what you think about the IS-4, and specifically, has the vehicle stood the test of time? And as always, thank you so much for watching, you've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.